Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Father Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing well. Look, my mic is on this time.
I was going to say, step one, turn the microphone on. Step two, you got
Yeah, I
it.
get a
You're
gold
done.
star.
I was going to say, if we make it through the rest of this podcast without having to stop again, we can track down a gold star for you. Yeah, sure. But no, we are here today. But Dad, how are you doing? You didn't say how you're doing.
I'm doing okay. Yeah, I'm back home. It's fun to be home, though. It's fun to be down in San Diego. Zero and I had a great time.
Yes. You were the ultimate, dog grandpa for the weekend, hanging out with her, taking care of her, taking her on long walks. She misses you already. I think when you left one day, she was crying at the door when you left. But yeah, so today we are here, like you said, you were here for the draft this past weekend. We are here today, coming off of this draft weekend, to talk a little bit about, how the draft went for Green Bay as a whole. And then we're also going to do the very first of our deep dives into the Packers' first draft pick, Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle, offensive lineman out of Arizona. And we're going to be doing these deep dives throughout the next several weeks as we talk about usually a couple players each episode. Today, we're just going to be doing one because we're going to start off with talking about, draft as a whole stuff. But keep tuned, to the podcast feed, either that's on Spotify, Apple. We can put all our episodes out on YouTube if you want to subscribe there, because we're going to be doing these deep dives going forward, talking about, production profiles, athletic profiles, scout takes, scout quotes, looking at, their data from PFF, looking at, what different people within the Packers organization themselves had to say about the player. We're going to have all of this stuff on deck for all of the Packers draft picks. And then we might even do a couple of undrafted free agents. The Packers have 8 of them. We might pick the ones that we're most excited about, maybe tack on a few of those. But so we're going to keep that up for the rest. Go ahead.
I want to say, and luckily there are 11 of them as we get through the quietest time of the offseason coming up here after the draft.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine, because that's the thing, we're reducing it down. Like you said, this is the quietest part of the NFL offseason. It is the moment from the draft until training camp and until week 1, really, where it's we've, instead of having 200 players to watch pre-draft where you're consuming all of the content for all of these players, you're down to just 11. But at least we're not like some teams where you're down to 4 players that you really get to dive deep on. So like we said, we're going to be doing
what do you do, two episodes per player?
Exactly. It's how much content can you milk out of 4 players? There's just nothing you can do. But like we said, we're going to be doing an episode a week for the rest of the offseason, talking about each of these prospects until we get to probably around OTAs or training camp. And then we're going to start talking about training camp, et cetera, et cetera. Just keep your eyes tuned to our Twitter at FatherSonPacker, because we'll be tweeting out whenever we have new episodes out, and also any stats and numbers and stuff that we find interesting when we're doing research on these players, any quotes we find interesting when we're doing research on these players, clips that other content creators are putting out there in terms of how these players are looking actually on the field. So yeah, once again, that's at FatherSonPacker. We'll be tweeting out ourselves, mostly a lot of numbers and stats, because that's kind of, the niche that we're in right with this podcast. But we'll be retweeting a lot of content from other content creators where, they're doing some more stuff with some of the film stuff, and they're doing some more stuff with, some writing, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many great content creators in the Packers Twitter spaces that there's just, you can never get to all of them, but we try to get to as many as we can. And I know I personally, Dad, have been just consuming as many pieces of content on this Packers draft class as possible. I don't know about you. Have you also been pretty much glued to a screen, watching clips, clips from okay, this is the clip from their first year when they made their very first start. This is how they're looking. There's an interview of them with their local TV station from 2022. It's that's how obsessed I'm getting at this point. It's probably unhealthy. Are you that far gone?
Not quite that far gone. You know how I said I've been doing more gardening as in my retirement? Well, what I meant before was I have a lot of gardening to do in my retirement. Not that I'd actually started yet. Well, today I was starting. Today we were actually, so there's a busy day outside. However, I have watched interviews of Jordan Morgan's family and coaches, and looked through a couple of game tape of him and a couple other players.
Yeah, I think I watched 3 or 4 full games of Morgan. We'll talk a little bit about our own thoughts on watching him a little bit later. But like we said, Dad, let's start, though, before we get too deep into Morgan. Let's start talking about the draft as a whole, because like you said, we have thoughts, but I think To start off, before we start getting deep dives into each player, I think it might be handy to just, take 100-foot view of the class as a whole and maybe just of Green Bay's approach. Do you think that might be? Yeah, let's just start there, and let's start with reading off all of the Packers draft picks from this class. So, first pick in the first round, the Packers take Jordan Morgan, like we said, with the 25th pick of the draft, offensive tackle, although they might play him at guard. He's got some versatility there. Their next pick was round 2, pick 45, linebacker Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. Jordan Morgan was out of Arizona, if I forgot to mention that. Their next pick was pick 58, Javon Bullard, second round also, safety out of Georgia. After that, round 3, pick 88, running back Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. After that, round 3, pick 91, linebacker Tyron Hopper out of
both
Missouri.
USC, out of both USCs, that is.
Out of
USC
via USC, yes. He was at South Carolina for 3 years, I believe, and then University of Southern California, the real USC, for 1 more year. If you're from South Carolina, that was a joke, I promise. But anyway, round 3, pick 91, linebacker Tyron Hopper out of Missouri. Round 4, pick 111, the Packers traded up to draft safety Evan Williams out of Oregon. Round 5, pick 163, the Packers took interior offensive lineman Jacob Bunk out of Duke.
Another one they traded up for.
Yes, another one that they traded up for. And for Edgerrin Cooper, they actually had traded down a little bit before they took him. They originally had pick 41 and then moved to pick 45. The next pick was Keaton Oladapo, a safety out of Oregon State, at pick 169. Then pick 202, offensive lineman Travis Glover out of Georgia State. Then in the 7th round, pick 245, quarterback Michael Pratt out of Tulane. Fell a little further than some people thought. So Packers get, another quarterback in that room. And then round 7, pick 255, corner Kalen King out of Penn State, a guy who before the pre-draft process was expected to go a little bit higher, but fell. So, Dad, now that we have the entire Packers draft class there, all 11 picks, what are your thoughts from like a macro view of the class? Anything pattern-wise that you thought was interesting? For me, it was interesting just the number of safeties that they took. The fact that they went with 3 safeties, including, trading up for one in the 4th round, taking, pretty decently premium pick at 58 on one, and then another flyer on a guy in the 5th round.
Yeah, I would say that some of the takes is that my hot takes turned out to be, that we had our hot takes episode, those turned out to be pretty cold in the end.
Wait, remind me, what was your, well, actually, I will say my take that there would only be 5 defensive players picked before 25. I think, I don't think it actually hit, but I was close. It was very close. I think, Arnold, Mitchell, Turner, Latu, and Murphy. And I think, I don't think it hit. It was close. I'm going to call it close enough. But yeah, no, our hot takes, they were designed to be hot takes. We can't be held accountable for those. That didn't mean anything.
Yep, I think the only thing it hit was maybe Jackson Powers Johnson falling out of the 1st round.
And that wasn't even that hot a take, to be honest.
That was pretty cool. They did not pick a quarterback. The Packers did not pick a quarterback before picking a running back, because they picked a running back pretty early.
Pretty early. I thought that was a little interesting.
That was a little earlier than I expected. And they only ended up with 3 small school players instead of, I think I was, or no.
No, you were saying 3, and that's, you were saying at least 2. And I was like, that's at least also another cold take. You were missing the entire point of the exercise. You were hedging too much. You needed to really 5 small school prospects. But I think
if you're going to fail, you might as well fail spectacularly.
Yeah, and definitely some things that I think were, I think my takeaways were also, clearly they want to get faster on defense. You see taking Edgerrin Cooper with that 4.5 140 up the middle. Javon Bullard brings some more speed than they had in the safety room already. Cooper's that 4.5 140 is improving on Devondre Campbell, who ran a 4.58 coming out of college, but obviously is not as fast as he was coming out of college as he gets up there in age. Tyron Hopper also, he ran a 4.68 according to most timers, but the Packers said they have him in the high 4.5s as well. So he would also provide a little bit more speed, that is, to the Packers defense. So I thought that was interesting as well. The other thing is, clearly they like their outside corners, or at least their outside corners. A lot of people hypothesized and had the Packers drafting a corner in the 1st round or high with their 41st overall pick. And that didn't happen. They didn't take a corner until the 7th round. And even Kalen King kind of projects to be more of a slot guy. They did, talk a little bit about both Evan Williams and Javon Bullard being guys that they want to try in the slot.
Yeah, I mentioned like 2 of their safeties could play in the slot.
But it does seem like, and Gutekunst said, like, they asked him about it. It's like, do you, I can't remember who it was that asked the question. It was like, do you like your corners? He's like, no, yeah, like, we feel like Jair, like, just getting back to, getting healthy, looking good. He's one of the best corners, what they were saying. And, like, Eric Stokes is looking healthy, which is something that, Matt LaFleur said that I thought was interesting. We'll talk a little bit about, quick aside, the big piece of news that I kind of, forgot to mention earlier is Alex McGough is moving to wide receiver. No, I'm kidding. The big piece of news is that it seems that just that Enagbare, and this is kind of a bit of a JJ Enagbare, Kingsley Enagbare, bit of a takeaway from the draft as well, that they didn't need as much edge help, is Enagbare, who we all thought tore his ACL because he said he tore his ACL, does not actually have an ACL tear or even a partial ACL tear. It's something different. They're not actually saying what the injury is, but it's a knee injury, but not as a major of one. And they think that he should hopefully be able to avoid surgery and be available for this coming year, which is big for the Packers' edge depth and is kind of, also like indicative in their draft, as we're talking about the draft from like 1,000-foot view, that, they're happy with their edge room as well as their outside corner room.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I was a little unhappy about the way the draft went, is that they didn't get an edge during the draft. And I mean, I was there. I watched the entire draft. I watched like however many hours of it.
It's a lot of hours.
Day 2, and day 3.
It's a lot of commitment right there.
I think Zero's getting a little bored of it.
Yeah, that's fine. She sleeps most of the day anyway.
And but yeah, I was really surprised that they did pick one, and then we found out, well, maybe they don't need it as badly because Enagbare could be ready at the beginning of the year. And I think, in typical fashion, when I think it was Gutekunst brought it up, it's like, we were able to keep it quiet. It's like, that's so Packers.
Yeah, that's very true. You did, and but what did you gain by keeping it quiet? I guess is we were able to keep it quiet.
I guess one thing you could say going into the draft,
you're obscuring your needs.
You're obscuring your needs.
I suppose
that's the only thing I can think of.
I guess
it's not like you're fooling the team you're not going to play next.
It's true. I guess any edge you can get, and pun intended. But anyway, Dad, back to what we were talking about initially. I just wanted to touch on that because I had it written down and hadn't gotten around to mentioning it. What did you think about, the Packers seemingly being comfortable and telling us, straight up that they were comfortable with their corner room? And he also, I think Gutekunst said, I got kind of sidetracked, but Gutekunst also said, Carrington Valentine played really well for us. We liked what Corey Ballantyne brought in terms of depth. What do you think about the Packers seemingly liking their outside corner room?
Yeah, so I thought they might get another one for depth. I was a little worried about how it was going because of possible injuries, how far along Stokes is and coming back from the multiple injuries he's had, whether we can expect Valentine to improve in year 2 or regress.
Yep. No player is guaranteed to get better. It's like Stokes from year 1 to year 2, before he got hurt, was not as good as he was year 1. So it's not guaranteed.
Yeah, so I thought they would add some for depth. And I do kind of agree with you in watching Kalen King's tape that he might be best suited as a slot corner because he is fearless in playing against the run, tackling, and is more agile than fast.
Yeah, I mean, he's not fast and he's pretty small too. So those are two things that are usually tougher to overcome when you're on the outside than when you're on the inside. But yeah, like we said, they seem to be comfortable with a quartet. That's the word. I was like, it's not a trio if they're 4. It's not like pretty much. But of Stokes, Jair, Valentine, and Ballantyne, and just kind of letting them battle it out. But in the slot, I think Keyshawn Nixon tweeted and then maybe deleted later, that he's not going to be taken off the field for anyone, or y'all got to stop taking me off the field in your lineups or something like that. But it does seem like, it's gearing up a little bit for, while they might seem happy with the outside, there's going to be more competition at that slot corner spot with Bullard being able to play there, Evan Williams being able to play there, Kalen King being able to play there, and obviously Keyshawn Nixon getting that contract to come back to play slot corner this year. What do you think about that competition at slot corner and, the secondary in general? I mean, pretty much like we got Xavier McKinney and we got that's like the only spot that's really guaranteed amongst the safeties, because I think that safety 2 spot, and that slot corner spot are pretty up for grabs.
Yeah, I was expecting or hoping they would draft one of the top slot guys. I was picking either Jerry Jones, Andrew Phillips, or Mike Sainristil.
Yep.
In one of those three in most of my mock drafts, and they had chances, especially to pick Jerry Jones at one point, and they decided not to. So that could be they were happy with the ability of some of their safeties to play slot. I mean, basically Bullard was the slot corner his second to last year before becoming safety in his last year, basically doing well in both.
Yeah.
So we'll see. That, other thoughts I had on the draft on the whole, what they were able to do. If you want to. Did you want to talk more about the?
What do you got?
So, what it's like about this. We talked about lying season. Basically, Gutekunst performed the art of subterfuge by doing what he said he was going to do, fooling everyone.
Yeah, he did. I think Andy Herman was talking about this. Is like he told us exactly what he was going to do. He did exactly,
and that's how he fooled. And that's how he fooled everybody.
Yeah.
He drafted a QB. He wanted a second safety who could do everything like McKinney, and he wanted linebackers who have the same skill set rather than a Micah, Sam, and a Will.
Yeah, so and I think you look at that. You look at that linebacker room now, and it's like it really is just like the Spider-Man meme. All of them pointing at each other with incredibly long arms, because all of them are pretty a little undersized. Although Quay is a little closer to real linebacker weight, but most of them are a little undersized, kind of high waisted in terms of like having longer legs and they got pterodactyl arms. So and they all can run and hit.
They can all run hit. Like I say, we got some downhill attacking defenders. That's another thing that was the thing about in the safeties and the linebacker room. They want guys who are going to attack the line of scrimmage and shoot the gaps.
I want to say
blitz.
Not just downhill, sideline to sideline. Like the speed on defense, and it's not because I think when I hear downhill, at least I think thumper. I think guy who's going to come in there and fill the A gap, which I don't think necessarily is where they were going with this draft. They have a lot more speed. And I think, the interesting thing is, to me, with them picking all those safeties is like, it seems like maybe they want to play a safety in the slot as opposed to, playing someone who's trained up as a corner in the slot. So maybe you get a little bit more run defense there. Playing like a guy like an Evan Williams or a Bullard there instead of like a Keyshawn Nixon. Keyshawn was pretty good in run like defense, but this is like a big difference from like, hey, like back when we were saying, hey, what if we played Jair in the slot? Like that does not seem to be a thing that is even thought about at all based on the profiles of these players that they're, kind of giving opportunities in the slot to, we think.
Yeah. And other things that I noticed was Packers they added like the top linebacker prospect
for most
Daniel
people.
Jeremiah's for most people. And the only one who was competing with was Peyton Wilson, who, because of injury concerns, wasn't even close to being the top linebacker.
For those of you who were like in on Peyton Wilson, turns out he didn't have an ACL in one of his knees, so that was maybe a deal breaker for the Packers. Some people had Junior Colson as their top linebacker, though. Like that wasn't like a crazy type. But a lot of people did have Cooper as their number one linebacker. And I'll give you back the floor.
Yeah, and they also got Daniel Jeremiah's number one running back in Marshawn Lloyd. He got one of the top two safety prospects by consensus in Bullard, and they got the top long snapper prospect as an undrafted free agent.
And
Peter
they're
from Wisconsin.
And they're from Wisconsin, which I think can you imagine? Like, honestly, Orzech was pretty miserable last year as a long snapper. I know like a lot of people are like, who cares? But I think some of Carlson's struggles can be attributed to Orzech being pretty rough snapping the ball last year. And I think, having a long snapper from Wisconsin coming to the pack. I mean, can you imagine a more cult hero than just a long snapper from UW coming to the Packers? I mean, come on now.
Yep. Is there anything more iconic than a special teamer local playing for the Packers?
Special teamer, and not just a special teamer. I mean, a long snapper. I mean, that's just perfect. Any other like little bits and pieces of the draft, like as a whole, that you found interesting? I thought, it seems that safeties are going to be very important in Hafley's scheme. And also, they seem to be drafting for special teams a little bit more in terms of, taking these safeties and linebackers that are going to be core special teamers for them, especially after they lost some of their core special teamers. Rudy Ford not going to be back. Dolan Levitt was cut mid-season. Brought Eric Wilson back, which was good, but, they are losing
Tyler Davis they'll have that they didn't have last year.
That's a really
returning.
good point. Yeah, because Tyler Davis, tight end, he is more of a special teams player and a guy that they used a lot on special teams 2 years ago. So that's a really good call out. Some other things I thought were interesting. Seems that they like at least 4 of their offensive linemen. They took Jordan Morgan in the first, but after that, they didn't take another one until day 3. It was a position that we thought they might hammer in those middle rounds in the 3rd round. But I thought that was interesting. So it seems like they're going to have, 6 guys, 7 guys compete for those 5 spots, but they like at least 4 of them, it seems like, right?
Yeah, so that was a little bit of a surprise. I was expecting, 2 offensive linemen before the end of day 2. And
Same.
they only had 1 at that point. And that they would take that, and I was expecting 1 or 2 on day 3, but combined with 2 on days 1 and 2. The other thing that I think is about this draft is the last couple of years, it seemed like Packers were one of the leaders in the league in value above, draft position.
In terms of looking at the consensus board, you mean?
Yeah. Valentine, Wicks, Rasheed Walker. But this year they have a few players that they reached on. Tyron Hopper, consensus 172, picked at 91. Evan Williams, consensus 223, picked at 111. Jacob Monk, consensus of 278, picked at 163, though I'm actually not too unhappy about that one, looking at some of his profile. I don't understand why he was so low. But they did also, they did add a couple, where they got value compared to consensus, especially Michael Pratt picked at 245 when his consensus was 119. And Kalen King, who was consensus 166, and they got him at 255, I think it was. And even Oladapo was, they got him 28 picks later than consensus. So they do have some candidates for these sort of draft steals. Of course, we'll see you don't really know what the draft steals are until they're playing. And so then you can tell, like last year, guys who outperformed their draft position rather than, being above their. So you don't really know if there's somebody's a draft steal until they get on the field in the season.
Yeah, and the consensus board is definitely
hope that the Packers are right this time around when they've picked players early.
Yeah, and the consensus board, is a good tool. But it's not the end all be all, because it seems like, for Evan Williams in particular is the one I'm thinking about. I think it was Jim Nagy who, runs the Senior Bowl, said that a number of teams were looking or I think he said hoping that Evan Williams would fall to them in the 4th round. And the Packers traded up to get him. So clearly they thought that they needed to make that move to get him, or else he would not have been there. So despite him being, in the low, 220, I think it was 218 around there, the low 200s for his consensus spot on the consensus board, it did seem like the NFL valued him a little bit higher than the media did.
Yeah, and maybe the Packers had a little bit of intel somehow that they didn't think he would last until the 5th round, even though that still would have been ahead of consensus. But the other thing that surprised me is that they picked 3 safeties in the end. That was a little bit of a surprise. I was expecting 2. I had them picking 3 offensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 2 safeties. But instead they went, 3, 2, and 3 safeties.
I can't say I'm that surprised, though, because I can't say I'm that surprised, though, because we've seen them, we have a need, we're going to hammer it. And they did that at linebacker, and they did that at safety, and they've done it in the past at, last year they did it at tight end and wide receiver. They've done it previously at running back. I'm not that surprised at all, because I think their logic is, if all 3 of them hit, that's a great problem to have, but statistically they're probably not going to. So
that's
2 of them
one of my notes is, are they just hedging their bets by picking 3 when they need 2? You might say.
I think so, because you could say they have 2 spots to fill. Also, if you want to argue that the slot spot is up for grabs, because I think, some people say that Bullard's best spot is at corner, or as that slot corner, that is. He can probably play all the spots, but I think some people would argue his best spot is in the slot. Evan Williams, they talked about, they might play him in the slot. We've already talked about all this. And Oladapo is more of a traditional safety. But I think they might be looking at it as hey, obviously Keyshawn, I think, is going to be given a chance to compete for that slot spot. It's not like his spot's just being given away. They paid him a decent amount of money in free agency to come back. But I do think, they see it as maybe 2 spots are open. We're going to bring in 3 guys to, compete for those 2 spots.
Well, you can actually say there are kind of 3 spots open. Though I was thinking they would draft 2 and maybe sign a street free agent somewhere as the 3rd, because
they definitely might still.
When you look at last year, they did lose 3 safeties with at least 600 snaps, and 2 of those had over 900. So they basically had, they've added 1, now they've added 2 more, and the only one they had returned was Anthony Johnson Jr. with 334 snaps. So they had a lot of snaps to fill. They basically completely revamped the.
But I can't say I'm super surprised because they talked about it all offseason. They'll talk about to anyone who listens is like, we think that the reason that we improved throughout the course of last year was the young players competing and knowing that, like, hey, if I'm not getting better every day, like, I'm not going to play. And so I think that they're saying,
here's your half a pool cue.
Exactly. It's like the Joker. It's like, we're having tryouts, baby. So I think that they're probably having a bit of that, just on the defensive side. And I think, my last takeaway, and we'll transfer over to talking about Morgan, is just, they're giving Hafley tools. They're not just being like, Hafley, go out there and fix the defense with the roster we got. They talked all offseason about, we think like these players like that we already have will fit fine into this scheme, and like we can just work with the guys. I mean, the way that they drafted seems to say that they think that they need some different players for this scheme and different archetypes of players for this scheme. And, there's minor changes because you can say like, hey, Edgerrin Cooper and Tyron Hopper are pretty similar to, Quay Walker in build and frame and stuff like that. But clearly they wanted to give Hafley the tools needed to succeed, which I think, makes sense.
Yeah, and they needed to add safeties. And so this also maybe reflects their opinion that it wasn't such a weak safety class compared to last year, where they must have thought it was a weak one, because we thought last year they needed to draft 1 or 2 safeties, and they took precisely none. And I spent time, I guess you could say it was not time well spent.
I was going to say, you can say wasted time. You can say wasted time. It's fine.
25 different safety prospects in 2023 to try to find ones who might fit what they're looking for.
Yeah, and that is interesting because, a lot of people were down on this safety class, like you said. General consensus was it was a weaker one, but when we heard Brian Gutekunst talk, I believe it was at the owners' meetings, he was like, no, we actually kind of like the safety class, and they put their money where their mouth is because they took 3 of them and a couple with some pretty decent, capital invested in them. But anyway, Dad, I think maybe, we're going on a little long here. Should we just get into this Jordan Morgan deep dive and start talking about, the first of the Packers that we're really going to dive into here?
Yeah, let's start getting into the details on their first pick overall. So overall for them.
Overall for us, yes. Not first overall pick, but first pick overall. I think that, there's a little delineation there. But anyway, Jordan Morgan, tackle out of Arizona. Let's just get into it. 22 years old. This is via Wikipedia. He's going to be 23 by the beginning of next season. He was born in Marana, Arizona, where he grew up, attended high school, and, stayed close by to attend the University of Arizona. Before we start getting into, his physical profile and his, athletic profile, we talked a little bit about some initial reactions to Jordan Morgan. But, Dad, just to remind some people, what was your first thought when the pick was announced?
I was a little surprised. I was thinking that there's a good chance they could go with an offensive lineman. And some of the ones we had been thinking about were hoping they would get, like Fautanu or maybe even Mims, though that seems a little less likely. We're already off the board. So the lineman I expected was Barton rather than Morgan. But, and the Packers listed Morgan as a tackle, and Barton, when he was picked, he was listed as a center. And so maybe the Packers are looking at positional value, and they would take a tackle in the first round, but not an interior offensive lineman. And maybe that's where they felt also, the value and the need both were.
Yeah, I mean, my initial thought was kind of similar, although I couldn't say I was surprised. He was very Packersy, for lack of a better word, kind of slightly, shorter arms.
But so is Barton.
Yeah, I know.
Their profiles are very, very similar.
I know, but I'm just saying I wasn't surprised that Morgan was the pick. It's not like they went out of, left field and took some guy that was completely out of their thresholds and like had a low athletic score. Because that would have surprised me if they took a guy who's like relative athletic score was down in like the 7s. Like that would have been shocking to me, and that's why I never
especially
really thought,
the first round. Yeah,
that's why I never really thought Kool-Aid was like really on their board, because that would have been pretty surprising to me. But for Morgan, I was a little surprised. My initial thought was, I was maybe a little disappointed that it wasn't Barton. Barton was a guy who was really high on my board. I felt like he, not just me, because like, what the hell do I know? But I felt like, though, that, and also, Nate Tice of The Athletic and several other people felt like Barton could play all 5 spots, including tackle. It's clearly the Packers did not, like you said. And the league perhaps did not as well. When the Buccaneers drafted Barton, that is, they announced him as a center. The Packers announced Morgan as a tackle, although they did say they feel like he could, have some versatility. And that was my main logicking it out of why they probably had Morgan ahead of Barton. I will say my initial reaction, I was like, because my main feeling was, Morgan to me, and we'll get into this a little bit, was a bit more of a finesse guy in terms of, he's a really good, zone run blocker, pretty light on his feet, quick pass protector, but doesn't have a lot of power and struggles with power himself. And I feel like the Packers, when they've gotten into trouble, have been having trouble in short yardage situations. We saw, versus the Niners, they struggled to, convert a couple of short ones, struggled to run the ball in key situations where they really needed to. And didn't really have a lot of tone setting on the offensive line and could get pushed around by bigger defensive lines. So I really wanted them to get a guy up front, who had a little bit more nasty to him, a little bit more aggression, a little bit more power, and wasn't as much of a finesse player like I feel like Morgan is. Not that that's always a bad thing, but I just feel like at times being so finessey along the offensive line has gotten them into trouble, and it could be handy to have a guy who's going to go punch the other team in the mouth, and that's kind of why I wasn't as high on Morgan. But Dad, anything else you want to say there? Or do you want to start talking?
I would say,
go ahead.
Oh, it's just that Morgan is pretty strong dude and supposedly a weight room junkie and generally considered as being kind of powerful, but maybe it's just his play style isn't as a mauler.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm saying.
He seems to have a decent amount of power.
He has a decent amount of power. Like you said, the coaches at Arizona said he's a big time leader in the weight room. He's kind of a freak in the weight room apparently, but I do feel like the way that he plays tackle is he doesn't really get a lot of push off the ball. We'll talk a little bit about our impressions of his play style and his play a little bit later. But Dad, like you said, he is pretty physically impressive. Do you want to talk a little bit about that physical profile that he has?
Sure. Let's talk about a few different ways of looking at it. So let's just start with his RAS. As an offensive tackle, he had a 9.25 RAS. And since the Packers talk about maybe
and just one thing I wanted to say for the relative athletic score for the RAS, shout out to Kentley Platt on Twitter. I think it's at MathBomb. He puts all of this relative athletic score stuff together. It's a very great tool. So check him out on Twitter. Check him out his website. It's very awesome. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so he was 9.25 at tackle and even higher at 9.82 if you recalibrate it as a guard instead of a tackle, since he might play there as well. According to they'll start him at tackle and then maybe see if he needs to play guard. His top RAS comparables, the number one is Tyron Smith. So that was nice.
Yeah, not bad.
5-time All-Pro, 8-time Pro Bowler. Then Braxton Jones, still pretty good, all rookie team player. And then Andre Dillard, who they just signed, was their third comp on RAS.football, who he's trying to revive his career now with the Packers after having a really bad year in Tennessee, but his first 3 years in Philadelphia weren't bad. And then another way to look at his top his profiles on Mock Draftable, and his top comp there is Ryan Ramczyk, the 3-time All-Pro.
If he turns out, and that's why I was going to say, I like if he turns out like Ryan Ramczyk, I mean, the home run the bases, run around the bases twice. But the one thing I do like about the Mock Draftable comparison compared to the RAS comparison is that it incorporates arm length and hand size in the Mock Draftable comparison. Yes. Because if you incorporate arm length, I don't think anyone would really say, because if you looked at him and Tyron Smith next to each other, I don't think many people would say that he's very similar to Tyron Smith. Tyron Smith's much bigger guy, but I see the Ramczyk comparison, and that's why I like the Mock Draftable comparables a little bit more.
Yeah, and then on Player Profiler, they have a athleticism score. He got 110.7, which is in the top third all time for offensive linemen, and out of 770 offensive linemen in their system. Now, if you look at his using RAS for the percentiles as a tackle, he was 39th percentile in height at 6'5", 58th percentile in weight at 311, 84th percentile in the bench at 27. He had elite speed, 91st percentile in the 40, 94th percentile in the 20-yard split, and 98th percentile in the 10-yard split. His vert was just so-so.
And that, I just want to say that 10-yard split is like so important for linemen, just being able to get out of your stance quickly, because 40-yard dash, how often are you going to run 40 yards? Although we did do a study earlier in the offseason that the 40-yard dash was pretty correlated to second contract value for tackles. But yeah, that 10-yard split is really, very important.
Right.
And
is getting out of the, I was just saying, getting out of the blocks is very similar to getting out of your stance and exploding, to beat your opponent to the spot. And then his vert was not quite as good. It was 58th percentile at 28 inches. The broad jump, however, was better, 87th percentile at 9'2". He didn't do any agility, so we have no idea how his testing would look there.
Which is a little surprising that the Packers went for a player who did not do any agilities, because, it had seemed in the past that they had some thresholds that they, held pretty standard for that spot. But I guess they just feel like, they saw him move well enough on screen. And if that's the logic, I can't blame him, because I watched him and I'm like, why on earth did this guy not run the agilities? I feel like he would have scored in like the high 90th percentile and all these, like, just look at the way he moves. But he chose not to run him. So
yeah, his lateral movement skills seem to be one of the best things he's doing out there. And then we get to his hand size, 95th percentile hand size.
Doesn't make sense.
On the ends of 9th percentile arm length. So kind of like a fire hydrant with a trash can lid on top of it.
It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't make any sense how his hands are that big and his arms are so dang short. Like, it's so odd to me. I don't understand it.
Yeah. So in summary, he's a little small for a tackle, but with good strength, good explosion, and elite speed. Now, this is basically the Packers' guy. That's the kind of profile they have. So he compares very closely with a typical Green Bay tackle under Gutekunst, both tackles who are drafted or tackles who have been like signed as unfrozen or free agents who have played for the Packers. So I've compared, found the average player in both of those groups. So all of the tackles who have played a snap for the Packers since 2018, or any of the draftees who have played. And this hypothetical player, the sort of average draftee, has an elite RAS of 9.38 compared to, Morgan's 9.24. Is smaller than average. So basically, if you're familiar with RAS, it's a red in the height, especially, and nearly so in the weight. But they have elite speed, on average, elite strength, good to elite jumps, and elite short shuttle. It's interesting. The 3-cone is not, on average, elite for the Packers. It's more in the good category, like sort of 60, 70 percentile rather than 80, 90 percentile.
And the only caveat I'm going to add there is just that this average, Packers tackle, like you're saying, it sounds exactly like Jordan Morgan, like in almost every single way. And it's another reason why I was like, we really shouldn't have been surprised it was Jordan Morgan. It's the astronaut meme. It's like it's all Jordan Morgan, always has been, baby. But the one thing I'm going to say, just as a caveat, is the Packers are usually not taking offensive linemen in the first round. So maybe their ideal person has maybe a little bit higher agilities, but that type of player is maybe not always available in the second, fifth round. Because if I remember correctly, it's the first offensive lineman they've taken in the first round since Sherrod, way back in, I think, 2011, I think it was.
I don't know what year it was, but it's been a while.
But
yeah, so this is a while. It is true that when you're talking about the average, it doesn't necessarily mean the ideal. This is just the guys they can get.
Yes, exactly.
Not the guys they would prefer to get. But if you compare to the guys they picked, he's only a quarter inch shorter than the Packers average, 3 pounds heavier, almost identical speeds, like 300ths of a second slower in the 40 and the 20-yard split, but 400ths of a second faster in the 10-yard split. Basically identical in the bench, like on average, like a half a rep or something. 1.6 inch shorter vertical, but 1 inch further on the broad. Now, his hands are 7/8 of an inch larger than the average, and his arms are 7/8 of an inch shorter than the average.
Yeah, and I will say, though, he does have short arms. It's like 32 and 7/8, and usually like the hard and fast rule is like 33-inch arms or bigger. Even guys with even guys with above 33-inch arms, like Bulaga when he came in, which is like 33 and a quarter, people were like, I don't know if he can hang there with 33 and a quarter inch arms. Now imagine a little bit shorter. But Ken Ingalls had a really funny tweet earlier today that I saw that was like, Go find 2 quarters, stack them on top of each other. That's 1/8 of an inch. That is the difference that people will tell you is like your 2 arms are too short to play tackle. And I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting is that, so Gerald Valdir also came up with this because he had like 98 snaps for the Packers in
Packers
2019.
legend, baby. Packers legend.
His arms are only 33 inches.
He looks bigger. That doesn't make sense
33 flat, even though he is otherwise a giant.
Yeah, because I was going to say, isn't he like 6'8"? Like, isn't
yeah,
he just
he actually,
human being?
Including him, actually starts. Some of they've gone for actually taller linemen that signed free agents, like Dennis Kelly and Jared Valdir, both over 6'8".
Yeah,
but yeah, Morgan's hands are actually larger than Valdir's.
Yeah,
and
I think
his arms are like 1/8 of an inch different.
I don't know if you saw this, but the height thing was a big point of contention on Packers Twitter. It's like, oh, Packers never draft linemen that are that tall. Like, oh, but they have and Connor was like, they have Caleb Jones and they like Dennis Kelly and they like Jared Valdir. And I think where I stood on it is like, if they're drafting a player, they like them to be able to play multiple spots, and the taller guys usually can't play guard. And so it's like, but if they're signing a guy like from free agency, it's usually to fill a specific spot, specific role. And so they're okay with getting the big guys who are just tackles.
And if it's an undrafted free agent, it's basically a lottery ticket.
Yeah, and it's like,
even more so than a draft pick.
Exactly. They can't be picky about like, well, we think he's good, but he's only a tackle. It's like, he's an UDFA. Just freaking sign the guy. Like,
yeah. So that's a lot of kind of where his draft profile is. It fits very well with the athletic averages that they go for at tackle. Now, I also have some notes on the injuries. He had the torn ACL in November of 2022. And by reports, that's why he waited a year to come out. He was, I think, originally planning on entering the draft last year. But with the torn ACL, he decided to go back to school. And despite that late injury, which was like late November, he was still able to play in the first game of the year in 2023, which would have been like 10 months later.
Right? Yeah, not a whole lot of time later. And not just play well. Like he had a really good 2023, almost just hit the ground running and didn't like fade down the stretch really. I mean, it may be a little bit. I think it was Brandon Thorne who does some really great work for Established Run, and as well as his Trench Warfare podcast and Trench Warfare newsletter talking about offensive line play. Felt like he maybe, faded a little down the stretch a little bit, but I mean, put together a great year coming off a torn ACL. I think, that's a testament to his toughness and a testament to his work ethic and a testament to his character that he, put in the work and grinded his way back for his teammates to be ready, for the fall. And I think that's pretty impressive.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was something the Packers paid particular attention to.
Yes, I think that was something that was, a selling point for sure. Anything else on his physical profile, Dad, or should we move over to, his play at the University of Arizona?
Let's move over to what the play looked like. The numbers and the tape.
So for his production profile, despite many draft experts projecting Morgan to have, guard versatility or for his better spot to be guard, he has only ever played left tackle at the college level, 37 starts at left tackle his time at Arizona. In terms of his work as a pass blocker, I mostly looked at 2023 and 2022. In 2023, amongst 208 players in the NCAA who played at least 100 snaps at left tackle, these numbers are per PFF. He ranked 18th in pressure rate allowed, so that's 18th out of 208. That's a really great number. 67th in sack rate allowed and 90th in penalty rate in 2023. Those numbers, that pressure rate stuff are removing. Pressure rate is, number of pressures allowed divided by non-spike pass blocking, or pass blocking reps. So just take out all the spikes and otherwise keep the pass plays. But 18th in pressure rate, that really pops off the screen. That's a very elite number to be, top 10% in pressure rate amongst all left tackles in the country. That's pretty great. And, not just tackles that are in this draft class, just any tackles playing in the NCAA who played at least 100 snaps there. And then in 2022, this was, the year before that, amongst 192 players in the NCAA who played at least 100 snaps at left tackle. He ranked 60th in pressure rate, 37th in sack rate, and 41st in penalty rate. So, you can see, I think the penalty rate is a bit of a noisy stat. I just wanted to throw it in there because that was interesting. But, one or two penalties here or there can, really shift that around and where you're ranked in that. So I wouldn't be too concerned by the fact that he was 90th this past year. The fact that his sack rate was, more middle of the road, like 40th percentile in 2023. It's something to keep an eye on, but it's really not too bad when you look at the fact that, he's only really, I think PFF tweeted this out themselves, only been credited for 3 sacks since 2022. So, some of these players have been credited for no sacks, and that's why the ranking is so low. But keep in mind that the ranking, I think, is important because, otherwise if I just throw a number at you that's like, oh, his pressure rate allowed was like
is that good? Is that bad?
Is that good? Is that bad? It's number with no context, and it doesn't do anyone any good. Keep in mind that these, rankings are all very tight together. So the pressure rate one is, I think, the most interesting one because, the number of pressures is, fluctuates, but the fact that he has only allowed 3 sacks since 2022, I think is, a testament to the fact that he is a pretty good pass blocker in most respects and against most rushers. I think certain rushers give him trouble, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that for the pass protection, he has some pretty good numbers there. In terms of run blocking, PFF really loved him as a run blocker. They had him as the 7th highest run block grade amongst those 208 left tackles in 2023, and they had him with the 11th highest run blocking grade amongst those 192 tackles in 2022. So back-to-back really nice years as a run blocker per PFF. More of a zone blocker than a power blocker, not really going to drive you off the ball. But like I said, we'll talk about that stuff later. So production-wise, a lot of those numbers look pretty good. Even the bad ones are like still better than middle of the pack, so you're not really too worried about any of those. In terms of looking at what some scouts had to say about him, though, anything you wanted to touch on in that production stuff, though, Dad, by the way?
I would just say that his overall, if you want to look at PFF grades, his pass blocking PFF grade was, also really good. Like 8th in all of the FBS amongst tackles with at least 100 snaps. And I think if you include the FCS, then it's still in the top 15.
Yeah, and I think I saw a note that was like only... There was someone tweeted this. I wish I remembered who did, and it's just been lurking in the back of my mind. I probably should have written it down. But it was like only Joe Alt and Jordan Morgan were both top 10 in PFF pass blocking grade and PFF run blocking grade. And PFF grades are not like a perfect stat, but they are generally correlated with good performance, and they're not perfect, like I said. But there's another piece of data that we should just keep in mind when we're evaluating these players. In terms of what scouts had to say about him, we'll start with Dane Brugler of The Athletic, just kind of the top dog, I guess, in my opinion, at least. He actually had him as his number 2 guard in the class. He did not have him as a tackle. He thought of him as a guard. Quote, this is the summary, quote, a 4-year starter at Arizona, Morgan was a constant at left tackle in offensive coordinator Brendan Carroll's zone-based scheme. After Arizona won a combined 5 games during his first 3 seasons on campus, Morgan helped lead the program's turnaround in 2023. A quick-footed blocker, Morgan displays range and aggression in the run game and gets on top of rushers quickly in his jump sets when he uses well-timed hands. His struggles in pass protection come when he is over-aggressive with his kick slide and gets too far up the arc, which can create a two-way go for rushers and open the door for inside counters. Overall, Morgan struggles to anchor mid-slide versus power, but he is a balanced mover who is well-schooled and physical in all phases. Though he can survive at tackle in the NFL, his skill set projects much better inside at guard, similar to Matthew Bergeron, who played at left guard for the Falcons last year. End quote. I added that, who played at left guard for the Falcons last year part, just in case you don't know who in case you're not as deep into the draft every year no one is as deep into the draft every year as Dane Brugler, but as some of us are. So it seems like a lot of that, kind of tracks with what we have thought about him and what, most people, like what the numbers are saying and stuff like that is, quick-footed mover, good blocker and zone scheme. We'll talk a little bit about struggles with power and stuff like that. Some other things that people had to say, Daniel Jeremiah had him as 8th offensive tackle. Quote, Morgan is a very athletic left tackle with average size. In pass pro, he is quick out of his stance to meet and cover up speed rushers. He can sink his weight and drop levels when bull rushed. He also does a nice job reworking his hands when he gets knocked back to regain leverage. He struggles to redirect inside when facing counter moves, getting beat on that inside shoulder too often. He will occasionally duck his head, which is correctable. In the run game, he is more finesse than power. He can use his quickness to cut off the backside, and he takes excellent angles to the second level to wall off linebackers. He doesn't have a lot of knockback power to displace defenders over his nose. Morgan is just over a year removed from ACL surgery, and I'm hopeful he can add more strength to power now that he's healthy. Overall, he has starting tackle ability. So Jeremiah saw him as a tackle, Brugler saw him as a guard, and just one more one. Brandon Thorn, I think the most interesting one was overall, Brandon Thorn, like I said, trench warfare. Daniel Jeremiah, was of NFL Network. Quote from Brandon Thorn, though, overall, Morgan has the frame, build, play strength, and physicality to make a smooth transition inside to guard with the initial quickness and burst to be a high-quality run blocker. His questionable range and middling redirect skills will be difficult to overcome on an island against NFL edge rushers, but he could make it work inside a run-first, play-action-based scheme that limits those exposures. I did, though, Dad, find it interesting that of all the prospects that I read scouting reports for, Jordan Morgan's had to be the most, all over the map. I mean, we got ones like, some people think he's only a guard. Other people think he's going to stay at tackle. Dane Brugler thought he was a guard. Bill Belichick said he's a tackle all the way. I think Nick Saban did as well. Chris Collinsworth, quote, definitely a guy that's ready to play today. This isn't a developmental project, end quote, Chris Collinsworth. And then Ben Fennell said the opposite, quote, I actually don't care about the short arms. It's the technique and execution. Morgan could have 36-inch arms, but they won't help him if he plays this way. Excellent experience, size, and high upside. And then I think Andy Herman said, I remember correctly, quote, everything is broken, end quote, where it's like he thinks he needs a total rework on his handwork and his footwork. And while, guys like Chris Collinsworth think he's ready to play already. And, some people are in the middle where it's like he's ready to play in a certain scheme, but maybe not another. And so the scouting reports for Morgan are really all over the map from what I have seen. Any thoughts on any of those, Dad? Whether, Brugler, Jeremiah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Any thoughts on any of those? Because I kept reading them and I'm like, okay, this guy's saying something completely different than what this guy was saying. And that is kind of the scouting process at times. It is all in the eye of the beholder. But I think especially with Jordan Morgan, it felt like the most, everyone was seeing something maybe a little bit different with him, except everyone would agree that, he does struggle with power.
Yeah, some of it is, I think there are certain aspects of run blocking he's really good at and other aspects he's really poor at. So it might depend on which ones you're focusing on. And then he has some strengths in pass pro, but also some weaknesses. So it kind of depends on which parts of it you think are the most important, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just interesting, though, because some people are saying, oh, his footwork is like he's ready to play. And some people are like, oh, his footwork's a total mess. And some people are like, oh, he has good, punch timing. Others are like, okay, I don't know what he's doing with his hands in these reps. I think also, it probably depends a little bit which games you watch. If you watch the UCLA game only, you probably come away with that thinking he's a top 15 pick because he's just shutting down Laiatu Latu. He did get him one time, but there's a reason Laiatu Latu was the first defensive player off the board. But he's shutting him down. He's paving roads. He's looking completely dialed in. And then if you watch, there's some other games where he maybe isn't as successful. But Dad, those are what the scouts think about him. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about what the Packers said in the immediate aftermath of drafting him and what they think about it?
Yeah, so I could find a few things. Matt LaFleur from his post-draft press conference said that, and he was kind of prompted, but that the plan is to try Morgan at left tackle first before, seeing if he needs to go to guard, but also do some cross-training. He mentioned that there's always some cross-training that goes in to getting the offensive line more generally ready for multiple positions. He said that Morgan's played a lot of football, which seems to be kind of a theme this year. They wanted guys who played a lot of snaps.
Yeah.
I think all three of their draft picks, not guys who had played only 8 games or started 8 games.
Yeah, I mean, the guys that they took, pretty much all of them have played a lot of football. I mean, what was it? Jacob Monk has played 57 games, which is how does that even make sense? That has to be close to the record or something.
4-year pro veteran.
Yeah,
the number of games he's got. Tom Silverstein asked if Morgan, with his athleticism, asked LaFleur, is the standard for Green Bay with the way they do play action and the movement they use? And LaFleur's response was that typically the defenders are more athletic than the offensive linemen, so you need guys who can anchor and move their feet to stay in front of guys. basically saying that that's one of the things they like about Morgan. And then later in a one-on-one with Larry McCarron, he said they also reiterated that they plan to start him at left tackle, but they also plan to rotate guys at different positions. Brian Gutekunst also had his post-draft comments and also one-on-one with Larry McCarron, where he said that he envisions Morgan being able to play 4 positions, despite basically only playing left tackle in college. And he said he moves well in space and is strong enough to move people off the spot. Maybe some of that, whether he does it or not, may depend on technique rather than, strength. Gutekunst emphasized that he's a 2-time captain, which seemed to have been a theme for this draft. They had a lot of captains.
Draft. Just to go off the bat, I mean, Morgan was a captain. Bullard was a captain. Hopper was a captain. Monk was a captain. I think that. Pratt was a captain. I think that. I think we took like 6 or 7 guys that are captains out of our 11.
Something
which is
like
kind of
6
a crazy
captains.
number.
I think I heard the number. I don't remember which ones they were. Gutekunst also mentioned that not only does he have athleticism in the testing, he also said it shows up on tape.
100% it does. I mean, we'll talk about that in a second. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and Gutekunst also said they ask their offensive linemen to move a lot in the run game, so that athleticism on tape is important. And he believes that his skill set will allow him to play multiple positions, even though he hasn't done it in the past. And when asked about where they wanted to pick him, he said the board held up really well. They had the chance, I think, at one point to move down. As I think he mentioned that Lions specifically were looking to trade up, and they decided they didn't want to trade with the Lions, whether because they didn't want to, let the Lions in front of them, or they thought that maybe Morgan was going to be there if they traded down to whatever that was, 29 or something.
Well, the thing that I was reading was that they had, multiple. I think Brian Gutekunst said they had multiple offers to trade down, and some of them took them out of the first round. And I think it was Andy Herman who said this is like, think about how much Brian Gutekunst loves his draft picks. And then imagine how much they must have liked Jordan Morgan to just say, no, it's okay, we don't want extra picks. And that probably would have been like an extra 3rd round pick to move down that far, maybe even extra 2nd.
If they were moving out of the first entirely, that would have been worth a fair amount in the 2nd pick.
Yeah, and so think about how much they really liked Morgan as a prospect to the point where they said no to those offers. And I think some other players, I think the Cowboys said that they had Jordan Morgan high on their board. I think the Ravens said they had Jordan Morgan high on their board. It wasn't just the Packers that, were high on him.
Yeah. And so the fact that they decided to stay and place and pick him says they really wanted Morgan. In kind of common Packers speak, they had mentioned they wanted to play their best 5. Mm-hmm. And so having flexible players lets them get the best 5 out there. They don't have two of their best, the top 2 players like competing for the same spot. And then there was also John Eric Sullivan, the VP of Player Personnel. He also mentioned Morgan's ability to play inside out, specifically about his build. I think him being kind of a thicker guy, but he also said he can bend and he can play with leverage if you want to kick him inside to guard. So those are things he mentioned as well, more about how his traits suggest he will have versatility, even though we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and I think, it sounds like they were all of the mind that the versatility was a real big selling point for Morgan. And I totally see why, because I don't think we really know who the best 5 linemen are yet. But we're going to have a lot of time during this offseason to talk about, different configurations around the O-line and, what kind of way is going to be the best to get the best 5 out there for the Packers. But Dad, should we move on to, closing this thing out and talking a little bit about, what we personally felt watching Morgan a little bit more in depth after the pick was made? And admittedly, possibly with maybe some rose-colored glasses, although we tried to, remain as objective as possible. Do you want to start off with what you saw when you watched him? And because I think we together actually both watched the Washington game, the UCLA game, and the Utah game were the 3 that I watched. Did you watch any beyond that? While you were looking at
in terms of whole games, no, I didn't watch any more full games beyond that, though, his highlights here and there, and also some of his tape from the Senior Bowl. But from watching the tape, it looks like his, in terms of run blocking, his best trait is his ability to move laterally quickly while he's engaged with a defender. to seal off the defender from plugging the rushing lane, and also to continue to turn the defender, basically torso torque.
He's got good torque in his torso, like turning the defender.
Yeah. So his core must be really strong, and to basically continue to turn the defender away from the play. In Pass Pro, what I like is he seems to have a quick first drop step with his outside foot. So right after the snap. So this is the part I think where he's been watching Bakhtiari tape as he
did say he watched Bakhtiari. Yeah.
So he likes, and so maybe he's trying to emulate that, though I think he's still working on it. However, he needs to be careful when you're lifting up that outside foot. You can't push back inside.
Exactly.
When that was in the air. So you don't want to have that up in the air too long when the guy's going to, and he did get beat inside right across his face in the worst rep he had against UCLA. I think it was UCLA.
It was
Latu. He doesn't give up that
across
inside
his
leverage
face
too quickly.
Yeah, Latu, and that was kind of in line with what Brugler was saying about, he sometimes oversets outside and gets beat immediately back across his face. Like Brugler was saying is exactly what
that's the
saying.
Only rep I saw that happened. Maybe there are more in other games I didn't watch. I would say mostly he stays very well balanced, however. He has his weight centered over his feet and rarely bends at the waist or lunges on blocks. Now, I would like to see him be more aggressive in run blocking at the second level. So when he's pulling and moving to the second level, he often just barely finds anybody, or he just gets one shove in.
He's not like the blind side where he's driving the guy downfield into across over the wall. He's not really finishing blocks at the second level and putting guys on their butt. He's usually bumping them out of the way as opposed to really getting the drive there.
He doesn't maintain contact with his target on the second level for very long. And I don't know if that's because he doesn't want to get too far over his skis, as it were, and lose his balance. And then so that's one of the knocks on his run blocking is his ability to kind of find a target and take the target out of the play completely. In the Senior Bowl, one-on-ones, I only saw, I think Nagy had him with the no pressures. I saw one rep where maybe he gave up a little bit of hurry, Latu forced the quarterback to step up. And that was facing 4 different top 100 edge rushers in Latu, Adisa Isaacs, Marshawn Nealand, and Booker. And I thought, so some of the 11-11s that I watched, he did pretty well against the Michigan edge rushers anyway. Though I did not see all of the reps from those.
There are a couple,
so you found one that I didn't see. That
there are a couple reps that Austin Booker from Kansas, who I forget where he was taken in this past draft, but at the Senior Bowl, he gave Morgan a couple of the worst reps I've seen Morgan have. Where the first one just straight into his chest and just shoves him straight backward. And I actually think that one of the things I was impressed with Morgan is. And I think this is something that, people say that is a very important skill for an offensive lineman to have. When he starts to get off balance or when he starts to get beat, his recovery is actually pretty impressive. The way he's able to snap back and get himself out of an awkward position and get himself. There was a couple reps where I'm like, how did he get back in front of the edge rusher? That edge rusher kind of had him beat, and he just kind of teleported right back in front of him, which is a testament to his, lateral movement skills, which again, I'm like, why didn't you run the agilities? I feel like you would have crushed them. But no, I do think it is something. Yeah. Booker, and he pushed him straight back into the quarterback. And then he also gave him another long arm. And that was kind of, what Brugler was saying when he talked about, mid slide dealing with power. He was mid kick slide and Booker just put his whole long arm through his chest and threw him another 5 yards into the backfield. It looked like it was a rough rep for Morgan. And that was kind of, the mid slide part of the power that he was dealing with. For me, I thought, watching Morgan, watching those 3 games, my main takeaway, from a positive aspect was he's really controlled. He's very, you almost never see him ending up on the ground, despite what I was just saying about those reps he had against Booker at the Senior Bowl. You almost never see him ending up on the ground. He's almost always staying in front of his man, mirroring him in space in pass protection. He's really smooth. He's a very good mover in space. When they had him pulling or going out into setting, blocking for a screen, you can really see his athleticism. It's not just performative athleticism. You could see functionally how his athleticism plays. His ability to get to a spot in run blocking, I found very impressive. In terms of, yeah, he's not going to drive people off the ball. Although I did think, when he was down blocking on guys or when he was on a double team, he generated pretty good push and was able to, get some drive there. He wasn't really driving guys one-on-one as much. But in run blocking and zone scheme, like he was able to get to like essentially wall off his man very successfully almost every time. And I think that's another testament to his lateral movement skills. Like I said, like a lot of people say, struggle with power. I think you can pretty clearly see it in the bad reps. I don't think it's like every single time you're like, man, like he's just cannot deal with the strength of these guys over and over. I think it's just that when he loses, it's clearly like, okay, he wasn't like strong enough, or okay, he gave up his chest. He has a bit of a bad habit of, well, I don't know if it's a bad habit or if it's just how he was being taught at Arizona, because we've seen guys like Bulaga and Bakhtiari do the outside to like clamping their shoulders hands and just like trying to not let go. But he's kind of given up his chest when he does that. And so he lets the defender like smack him in the chest and he can lose balance. Although, like I said, I did think his recovery was pretty good, but struggling with power, Braylon Trice of Washington gave him issues. Like I said, Austin Booker at the Senior Bowl gave him a lot of issues, a couple really bad reps. My other, negative takeaway is I just wish he played with more aggression, like from a mindset perspective. I feel like, he was never really playing like through the whistle, wasn't really, playing with aggression, and like obviously there's a line there. Like you don't want to be Trevor Penning out there, no offense, but like I do want like maybe a little bit of nasty and aggressiveness in my offensive lineman. But, I guess if that's your main complaint, I guess you're just champagne problems, I suppose. You're not getting any late whistles or anything, I guess, or flags, late flags and late hits. But I did wish he played with maybe a little bit more aggression, a little bit more nastiness at the point of attack. And that's probably my main complaint beyond like, his just general struggles with power. And like I said, when we were talking earlier, it's like my main thing was like, I just wish we had a guy with a little more power, a little more pop, and a little less finesse up front, because I think that's sometimes where we run into trouble, is getting bullied up front by just bigger, more physical defensive lines, because our offensive line is a lot of, like, oh, we're moving to tackle the guard, and he's going to be a great pass protector, but not a great run blocker. He's not going to get much drive off the ball, and we're going to struggle in short yardage situations running the ball. And, maybe Morgan, a little bit further off. Like we said, some people think that he can he'll get a little more strength back as he, takes even more time away from that ACL injury. But, we'll see. Dad, anything else that you wanted to add with your takeaways from him, or should we wrap this thing up?
I think, in terms of like the kind of play the whistle, you would like to see how I would think of it, not necessarily playing dirty. It's like, are you driving the guy downfield as far as you can while the play is going on? Instead of just kind of being satisfied, well, I've gone far enough.
Yeah, he definitely did. There's a lot of where I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but he'll start blocking this guy. He'll like kind of like win the rep, quote unquote, and then he'll look to see like where the ball is. Like he'll check. It's like, okay, how are we doing on this play? Which is like fine, but like, just finish your guy off, like plant him, pancake him. There aren't a whole lot of pancakes on his tape. There's some, but not a whole lot, especially not in the run game. He's not really pancaking guys in the run game very much. But Dad, let's wrap this thing up with a quote from Morgan himself from his initial phone call after the draft. Quote, "I cannot wait to get out there and protect Jordan. That's what an offensive lineman is supposed to do. Protect your quarterback, open holes for your running back. And that's what I'm here to do." End quote. And I love it. I love the mentality. It sounds like, he's a great guy. He's a big locker room guy, team captain. And I think he's going to fit right in Green Bay. And we know Green Bay, I think that's the thing, is like, we trust Green Bay's ability to identify and develop offensive linemen that will fit and work in their scheme. And that's why I am very excited about Jordan Morgan. Dad, any last things you want to throw in before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think that you would give the Packers a lot of credit for choosing linemen that fit their scheme, but I think they also do a really good job of coaching them up so that they get better while they're there. So I think if there's one position we want to trust the Packers, what they're doing, it's
offensive linemen,
offensive line
and second round receivers. And those are the two. And maybe late first round quarterbacks as well.
Yes.
But anyway, thank you everyone so much for listening. Shout out to Jordan Morgan. Welcome to Green Bay, newest Packer. We're going to be doing an episode every single week for the rest of the offseason. We're going to, probably another 5 or 6 episodes here, breaking down the rest of the Packers draft picks, going deep dives into all of them. And then, just talking about this upcoming season for Green Bay. It could be a very exciting one. A lot of, people excited after what happened last year, but always, got to keep a little bit tentative. Progression isn't always linear. There were parts of last year that, probably we've forgotten, but they were very frustrating at the time. And so, but anyway, a very exciting season coming up nonetheless. We're hoping we can build on that momentum from last year. Like we said earlier, subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, even on YouTube. We put all our episodes out there. And then follow us on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes, numbers we find interesting, et cetera, stuff from other content creators. Reach out to us there if you want to just chat to us about draft picks. I mean, we ain't got nothing better to do. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.